Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of the Leadership of Construction podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and today we are joined by the absolute brilliant Andrew Brough. Andrew is a leadership development specialist and the author of the book, Leadership the Exponential Effect. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Michael, really such a privilege to be able to chat to you today. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, fantastic. The pleasure is all mine. So usually I would ask, first question is, how did you get into construction? But that isn't applicable in this case. So the purpose of this podcast really is to get to understand how you got into leadership and explore what is this leadership, the exponential effect. It's a concept that I'm not familiar with, and I really wanted to understand what that's all about. So before we go diving into that, I would like to just get an idea of what your background is and how did you get to where you are today in coaching and being a specialist.
So I'm talking to you from the garden route of South Africa, Michael, just outside Knysna. I've lived here most of my life, originally born in the UK. My background was in broadcasting, and then I got into sales and marketing and education and adult education and training, and realized that if I was going to help people in terms of their sales and marketing, that would require some very specific training. And then I realized at an organizational level that if you wanted to move organizations, you needed to work with leaders. And so I began a journey about 25 years ago of studying leadership, went back to school, did a master's degree in organizational leadership, and then went on to do a PhD, and have been fascinated by this interplay between personal, interpersonal, and organizational leadership. I run a leadership institute now, and have done for many years, and work with leaders and teams around the world, now with leaders in about 80 different countries. And certainly since the pandemic, that need for virtual or online training has become much more prevalent. But it was certainly something that we were doing, with many of our IT clients, probably 13, 14 years ago. My connection with construction is that here in South Africa, I'm part of the faculty of the Association of Quantity Surveyors. So they have to do continuing professional development. And as part of that, I offer a number of programs for the association, which are accredited around leadership and strategy.
That's fantastic. And the way that we sort of connected was around the question, which I usually say for the end, but I want to open with it, is what do you think is the most important aspect of leadership?
Well, I was so impressed by your question that I couldn't help but reach out to you on LinkedIn and say, well, I've actually put a book out on that question and tried to answer what I think is not an easy question at all, Michael. I don't think there is one single element. The research shows us that there is a bank of competencies or skills or principles that leaders need to have. And so in the book, I try and answer that by looking at 4 different sections. I look at leading yourself, because I think that really is important. Leading others. So here you're talking about being able to influence your effective communication. Leading teams. So here we have alignment and collaboration, and then ultimately leading for results. And so that exponential effect, I think, is when you have these right leadership elements combined at the right time, and you catalyze those, and often very small incremental leadership decisions and actions can have far-reaching effects, both positively and negatively. So that's really the idea that I work with in the book, to try and show how very often we assume that it's only people who have position or hierarchy or title that can lead. But certainly I think in the new world of work, Michael, this idea of influencing without authority and leading from the basis of your skill set, from your expertise, from your ability to develop social capital, all of those things I think are going to become increasingly important. And certainly in the construction sector, as you look to lead, whether you are, building or whether you are managing or whether you're in finance, I do think that those leadership skills are going to become front and center in a post-lockdown world. I'm nervous to talk about a post-pandemic world, seeing as we're still very much in the middle of this thing. But as we navigate this challenge of working across distance, across time zones. One of the things that I see, Michael, is we're more connected than ever through technology, but we're probably really lacking in that social cohesion and engagement, and really able to create that environment where people are able to display their best in a very different world to what it was 12 months ago.
I could not agree with you anymore. Yeah, the key thing about this sort of podcast is I always ask, what do you think is the most important aspect of leadership? And every single time, without prompt, it's a different response. And so I wanted to ask a bit wider. And again, I get some really great answers, like things I would have never thought of. And one of my favorites is curiosity. I think, leaders being curious is very important. And I think you're right. There is a challenge with leadership. It's because there is no one thing. I think I went into this, I sort of started my journey along discovering what leadership is in about sort of early 2019. Before that, I'd done some self-development, self-training, and I'd seen leaders. So I sort of had an idea, a very vague idea of what leadership was, and very much thought you had to either be a very supportive or directive behaviors in terms of that. And started 2019, when that illusion was shattered and realized this is a heck of a lot more difficult than I expected. That's when I needed to start along this journey of learning it myself. And I think that's what it just makes it so much more complicated. Well, probably not needed to be so complicated, but it is that there are so many attributes, so many behaviors, and so many key aspects to leadership, which are in its own right all very important. And perhaps, you correct me if I'm wrong, you don't have to be an expert in each area, but you have to at least appreciate each area. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the days of believing that leaders have to know everything and be experts in everything are long gone. I do think that in this world in which we're working now, Michael, an ability to understand the strengths of the team that you have working with you and playing to those strengths means that you don't have to be this superhero. I think if you trace leadership development research over the last 50 or 60 years, we did see in the beginning this tendency towards the very charismatic, the very heroic leader, this idea that he was almost, or she was almost some kind of Superman or Superwoman. And I think we've realized that in many cases, it's not necessarily the most extrovert. It's not necessarily the person who is the most talented at a particular skill set or job, but it's that individual who can influence others to achieve an overarching goal. And so in some ways that takes the pressure off the individual having to be all things to all people. But in another way, it creates a greater level of accountability to find those individuals within the team who are going to help you to achieve that. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that's important, Michael, right now is that as organizations are flatter and more matrixed, and I think this is true even in the construction sector, you're probably going to find that you are needing to lead people who are not your direct reports and over whom you have no formal authority, but who you still need to be able to work with in order to get the job done. And so for people who've relied in the past on position only, they're now struggling because why would I listen to you, Michael, if you're not my boss? Why would I give you my expertise or my input or share resources if I don't have to? And so that ability to understand how to influence and how to move the needle towards a particular outcome, I think is something we're all going to have to relook at as things become even more challenging.
Absolutely, 100%. I couldn't put it better myself. I think just to pick up on those 2 points then. So you talk about these leaders, the days of having to know everything are sort of long gone. That, I think, is one of the struggles that I started off with, in that the leadership role I was in, I was almost in a way too competent or too technically competent, is I knew too much about the subject matter. And therefore, in my naivety, I isolated myself and isolated other people and didn't listen to other people's views, recognizing everybody's value in the teams. And I think that's absolutely right. Almost to the point where having too much knowledge, knowing too much, could almost be a little bit of a hindrance in a way. And then in your second point, organizations definitely are becoming more flatter. And the onus of being able to lead is just almost a way of act of kindness. It's an act of supporting your peers. It's an act of just being able to help and get along. Do you think that's right?
I think those are certainly elements of it. And I want to come back to something that you said earlier. What I see often with junior managers who are then coming into middle management is they've got there based on their technical competence. So if you look at kind of an 80-20 split, 80% of their time was spent doing what they do best, which was their technical expertise, and 20% was on communication and influencing others. But then when you get into middle and senior management, you see those ratios change. So that by the time you get to senior leadership, it's less about what you're able to do yourself technically, and much more about what you can do in terms of setting vision, being clear about what the end goal is, creating alignment, making sure that there's a duplication of ideas, harnessing the creativity and the insight of those you work with. And it's not to say that your technical expertise is no longer important. Of course it is. But it's now not up to you alone to achieve something. It's now your ability to lead others to get that job done and to replicate that. And I think, again, that's where the exponential effect comes in. In the book, Michael, I give a couple of metaphors here. The one is that if you think about, for example, some research that was done by Stephen Morris in the University of Toronto, he took a domino stack. And the first domino, if you can imagine this, was relatively small. It was 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. So very, very tiny. And then he took a domino, which was 1.5 times its size, and he replicated that. And so by the time he got to the 13th domino, it weighed almost 50 kilograms and it was 1 meter tall. So if you can imagine the first one, 5 millimeters high, 1 millimeter thick, the 13th one, 50 kilograms weight, 1 meter high, that small domino was able to, as it tipped over the others, eventually knock over that very large one. And so he showed that progressively, 29 times, these larger dominoes could eventually topple something the height of the Empire State Building. And I think that's a great metaphor, Michael, for what we're talking about, that often we second guess our small act, our small decision making, the small part we play in the overall organizational dynamic. But a good leader will create line of sight and will explain to you, Michael, how what you're doing at a very operational level, at what might seem relatively insignificant, when that is scaled, can actually have far-reaching effects across the organization. And I think that's a critical part of what leaders need to be able to do.
That metaphor is absolutely fantastic. And I see where the exponential comes from now. You can almost see that, getting exponentially bigger as the dominoes get larger. And I think that's a really good analogy of how the small bits, almost the day-to-day bits, they're like the checking, as a leader, you're checking in and checking on your peers and making sure they're okay. Even sometimes just lending an ear, even just the act of making a cup of coffee, making a tea, these sort of things helping people to sort of feel engaged with whatever it is, whatever the task is that you're doing. And also just listening, appreciating their value and their input, as opposed to being closed off to it. Even if, no matter how small that is, as you could say, it has an exponential effect. So I can see how that works.
Yeah, and I was challenged by a mathematician to say, well, Andy, are you using this literally? And of course I'm not. We're using it as a metaphor. But I think, let me also say, Michael, it works in reverse. That if you are not doing these things, if you're not creating psychological safety, if you're not reaching out and casting vision and making sure that people are clear about what's going on, then the exponential effect can be exponentially disastrous. And so that's why in the book, I start by talking about self-leadership, character, purpose, these deep questions that we need to be able to answer for ourselves. Because I make the point that if you can't lead yourself, how can you ever lead others? And many failures of leadership are often expressed at an organizational level, but they start with failures of self, failures of character, failures of purpose, failures of identity. So yeah, it's a tall order to want to be a leader. But I do think that if we can start with the self and the question of who am I, that, my identity is not linked to what I do, but it's based on a secure understanding of who I am. And, that I don't necessarily think I need to lose my ego, but I need to be secure in my identity so that my ego is not wrapped up in being self-serving and seeing my position as an opportunity for everybody else to bow down to me. But that ultimately my ego as a leader is tied to the idea that I'm here to serve. And so the notion of servant leadership, I think, becomes really important in the day and age in which we work.
It's just almost scary that what you're saying is this is exactly the route and path that I've gone in terms of learning and developing myself. I mean, I think when I realized as a leader that it wasn't going so well and I needed to learn and become better, was looking inwards at myself and looking, I haven't got the skills, I'm equipped in order how to deal with this. And so that's when I decided I needed to go and find that information. It was very much self-leadership. I enrolled in free open university courses. I read books and watched YouTube videos, and certainly that started that journey. But I think talking with people like yourself and being able to share that to everybody else that may listen or watch the podcast is extremely helpful. Getting experience from other people, listening to experiences is helpful. And I think you're right. I think it starts with self-leadership. So just about your book then, you say you start with self-leadership. Is there a series of things you do about self-leadership and leadership of a team? How is it constructed?
Yes. So 4 parts, 12 chapters, about 140 references. So what I tried to do, Michael, is navigate a strong academic piece that would hold rigor, on the MBA programs that I teach. But I also wanted to be approachable for somebody who, when we could still travel, is walking through an airport, sees it in a bookshop, picks it up and goes, this is an interesting and compelling read because the stories and the narratives are informative and entertaining. So I start in the book with this whole idea of leading self. And I look at 3 ideas. The first one is character. The second one is purpose. And the third one is resilience. I could have chosen probably 3 or 4 others to talk about self-leadership, but I wanted to open the discussion with this deep idea of self-reflection. On the character piece, Michael, I use a metaphor of a diamond. A diamond, and it's very apt being here in South Africa, where diamonds are still one of our big exports. But if you take a diamond and you polish that thing, the diamond it creates confidence in terms of its intrinsic value through a couple of things: the cut, the color, the clarity, and those all lend some degree of confidence in the mind of the jeweler as far as this gemstone. And I think character is very similar, that when we think about character as a leader, it would have a number of different facets. And so I invite the reader to come on a journey with me where at the end of each chapter, we have questions for self-reflection. And in the character piece, I ask questions about identity. Who am I? Who am I afraid that I'm not? Who am I comparing myself to? Because I think often as leaders, that imposter syndrome can be something that we struggle with. I'm not good enough. I'm not qualified enough. I don't have enough skills. I'm not like so-and-so. And therefore, because I'm not like so-and-so, I can't lead. But I think really healthy leaders are secure in their own identity, and they're not compelled to fall into that trap of comparison. I also think leadership character is about integrity, and integrity for me has a moral equivalent to it. So it's more than just doing what you say you will do, but it's about doing what is right. I also talk about character as intent. And I think this is important in the new world of work, Michael, is when somebody reaches out to you and asks for your support or advice or input, what is their intent? Is Andy out to get you? Is he looking to set you up for failure? Or in this virtual world, can we take the risk to assume positive intent? That even though we don't know each other, and even though I'm sitting in South Africa and you're sitting in Lincolnshire, very quickly, because we've got a sense of being on the same page and having similar goals, the intent is mutual, the intent is shared. And so there isn't that historical social cohesion that we would have had in terms of getting to know each other, but there's just that willingness to give ourselves to the relationship and to assume that we have positive intent with each other. I also think that character largely has to do with recognizing that from the point of view of the facets of character, not only do you want identity and integrity, but you also need to recognize that from a leadership point of view, it is about initiative. It's about getting things done. And then I also suggest that it's about insight, leadership insight. So I need to have self-awareness as a leader. I need to have social awareness, awareness of the people I'm looking to lead. And I think very importantly, a leader also needs situational awareness. So one of the frameworks that we use, Michael, and I do try and run a parallel between good leadership frameworks and good examples, but one of those is something you may have heard of called the VUCA model, VUCA. It's something that's been bandied about certainly over the last 12 months. And it simply says that, in a world that is increasingly volatile, V, U, uncertain, C, complex, and A, ambiguous, we need leadership that can navigate that. So back to your first question, what is the most important characteristic of leadership? Well, I would say it would need to be a leader that can navigate volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And when that framework was put out as an adaptive leadership response, that same VUCA was described as a VUCA negative, which is what I've just given you, and then the VUCA positive. So where we have volatility, the V becomes vision. Where we have uncertainty, the U becomes understanding. Where we have complexity, the C becomes clarity. And where we have the ambiguity, the A becomes agility. So moving the mindset from VUCA negative to VUCA positive, and each of those, the vision, the understanding, the clarity, and the agility, I think would be important elements to have in your leadership arsenal. But then I began to think about what's happened to us globally over the last 12 to 18 months. And I make the suggestion in the book that maybe we could rethink that framework from VUCA to VUCAR. So I'm adding an R on the end there. So now it becomes volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and recurrency. This idea that as we talk to each other today, we're both in lockdown. Nobody really knows, Michael, how long this situation will go on, how long you will have to continue homeschooling your little man, how long we will face the challenges of social distancing, and what it will take to get this vaccine rollout. So all of that has a knock-on effect in terms of recurrency. And I don't know about you, Michael, but I'm finding as I work with family and friends and colleagues, one of the most difficult parts about what we're facing is the unknown factor of how long this will go on for. It's almost as if I could say to you, listen, 28th of February, we're done. Or even 28th of February, 2023, we're done. We might go, gosh, that sounds like a long time, but at least there is an end in mind. The problem is none of us, even the most skilled epidemiologists, can tell us how long this will take. So there is an element of recurrency, VUCA negative. I think the VUCA positive then is the resilience. And so I write a whole chapter in this leadership book, The Exponential Effect, on what is resilience, what is leadership resilience, how do we create that, how do we develop it? I argue that it's a skill that can be acquired and nurtured and developed. And certainly I think most leaders now who are going to continue to have significant influence will need to have self-resilience, will need to be able to help their team develop resilience, and certainly will need to have organizational or business resilience to try and get through however long this thing goes on for. So I think that again talks into your first question, Mike.
So I mean, all of this is absolutely fantastic stuff. I mean, I wish I had all this at the start of my journey, because I probably would have got through a lot of this a lot quicker. But I've certainly been through all those cycles you talk about of self-reflection, identity, imposter syndrome, things like that, embarrassment, because I didn't know what I was doing. I felt embarrassed. And I'll say, when I needed support, I didn't go to my company and my directors, not because I didn't think they could help or I think I'd be ridiculed, but because I was just sort of embarrassed that I didn't know what I was doing, and I think I probably knew a lot more than I thought, but at the time I thought I knew nothing. This is just embarrassing. So I went to my dad instead, a safe place where I could feel a bit vulnerable and not get ridiculed and not get shamed, and I could just get support. And but if I had gone to my company, I'm sure I would have got that. And I think the environment is hugely important, that you can, when you're self-reflecting, when you're asking who am I, you have to be a little bit vulnerable. You have to be a little bit self-critical to really sort of understand how you impact on other people, how you make other people feel, and how that affects the task that you're trying to deal with, the thing you're trying to do. So that's amazing stuff that you've just really laid out. But the VUCA is a brilliant little concept, and something that I've not heard of that model before in that way, but I've definitely sort of looked at and discussed with people about leadership through change and leadership through a crisis. And this pandemic is this is why your book is so relevant. This is kind of what we're going through right now. And you're right, recurrence and resilience, and spotting in yourself and in your team and in your family where perhaps they're having a bad day, an off day, because we're going to have ups, we're going to have downs. And this doesn't have to be this pandemic. This can just be generally on a project. It could be just generally at a time you're going through some organizational change, whatever it is, whatever the change is, you're going to have ups, you're going to have downs. And I believe part of it is about being optimistic but we will get there in the future. And when we get through this in the future, we will be absolutely stronger. Do you think optimism is an essential part of being a leader?
I think that leaders have to be able to understand that the future is not one, but many. Now, maybe I must explain what I mean by that. Leaders who are fatalistic will just assume that everything will run its course and will feel that they have no part to play. But leaders who understand that dynamic between the fact that I have a sphere of concern. So right now, I have a huge sphere of concern, as you do, Michael. I'm concerned about vaccinations. I'm concerned about disease prevalence. I'm concerned about infection rates and death rates. The truth is, I have very little I have very few things I can do to control all of that. But what is in my circle of influence is I can keep myself educated. I can keep myself sanitized. I can choose to physical distance. I can wear a mask. So I can play my part in recognizing what I can do, and then be in the place of surrender where the things that the things I can't do anything about, I release those. But coming back to this idea of optimism, I do think that leaders recognize that there is a probable future, there is a possible future, and there is a preferred future. And if I'm working with you towards a preferred future, a future where we can see the death rates come down, we can see the infection rates come down, we can see families restored to some degree of normality, we can see business communities thrive again. That's the preferred future. And so as a leader, Michael, I have to ask myself, what are the steps I can take to influence that which is in my control, and to help create an environment where people take, and another chapter in the book, personal responsibility and accountability for what they can do. You know, there's so much blaming, misinformation, conspiracy theory, people throwing their hands up in the air. But if we all take personal responsibility for the things that we can do, I think that's where the optimism comes in. I'm not one who just wants to have blind faith, or just to be speaking platitudes, or, you know, it's all going to work out. I do have a very strong personal faith, but not just a naive optimism. And I think those things are different. But certainly as leaders, an ability to see a preferred future, and then to begin to harness skills and expertise and resources to the degree that you can to work towards that preferred future, to me is much more preferable than just giving up and accepting the status quo, you know, and seeing everything as a fait accompli.
I agree with that, because I think in my sort of definition of optimism, I see you're not numb or ignorant to the current situation of things are a bit rubbish, put it politely, and there are steps to take, because there's opportunities with all this crisis. There are opportunities, but there are steps to take to get to, I guess, to paraphrase yourself, to get to that preferred future. And I think I hold in my head that preferred future, that where we could be and where we could get to. And I suppose in my head, I might have those steps that I think I need to take. You talk about playing your part in this current pandemic, for example, of wearing a mask and social distancing and staying inside, all that sort of stuff. But also, you know, just to, how can I make my team stronger? How can I help them improve on a certain aspect of what we do day to day? Let's pick something about health and safety. How can we improve that? You know, I'm sure we're pretty good at it now, but let's just have a focus on this. And then the next step, how can we improve on this? And each step will bring us to this more preferred sort of future. Don't have control of what happens globally and what happens with all the other parts of this, but there's a phrase in the film Frozen 2, which is sad that I know it all too well because of my children, but you know, it's controlling what you can when there's so much going around you that you can't control, and taking those steps to this sort of preferred future, this optimist, and that it's fine, we will get to a better place. The steps to go through to get to that. But I'm with you, not a sort of blind faith that we'll just keep doing what we're doing and ignoring that it's there and then hope that it'll be okay in the future. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. Right. It's actively, as you've said, taking those steps to get to that preferred future. And then you said there's the possible and probable. Is that right? Futures?
Absolutely. Yeah. So probable is, you know, this is the trend that we're on. If we do nothing, probably this is what we'll end up with. Possible is, you know, well, there is more than one option. And then of those different possible futures, this is the preferred future. And what is my role as a leader in navigating that and carving out that preferred future for the people that I have influence with and on? So I do think as a leader, understanding your part in being able to navigate that is really important, to the extent that you have influence and control.
And the first part of VUCA is vision, isn't it?
Exactly.
I can see in the future that there is that space, there is that we are going to get to that golden promised land or whatever it is, but that it's setting that vision as well, isn't it? So that other people buy into it and believe into it. It's like, okay, it's tough right now, but I believe we're going to get through this. We're going to get through to the other side. So that's the first part of VUCA, isn't it?
It is, Michael, and I think the vision part does have two elements. It's that forward-looking, telescopic, you know, preferred future, but it's also, as Otto Scharmer says, bending the beam of observation back upon yourself and doing some introspection in terms of vision and you know, that those deep questions around my own purpose, which is the second chapter in the book. You know, so why are you here? What is your purpose? What are you about? And so I make a strong case in the second chapter that as an authentic leader, confidence in that principle of well-being, clarifying the essential reasons for your existence, and then shaping your intentions and objectives as a leader is so important. It was Viktor Frankl who said, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. And I think right now, leaders have got to find that why to live, because if you can answer that question, it doesn't matter what circumstances throw at us, we can navigate that.
And that's really good. Part of your self-reflection and self-leadership, you talked about is purpose. And through this process this journey I've gone on, I found my purpose. And in part is why I've started this podcast. It's because I want to help as many people as possible to become better leaders. That's my purpose. And I follow a lot and read books from Simon Sinek. So he talks about the infinite and finite games. Don't know if you've heard of those. Yeah. So
I have, and in fact, I referenced those in the last chapter of the book, where if we're leading for results, we can't just have results that are based on the finite game.
Yeah.
Increase sales or increase profitability or even increase health and safety. Those are all good metrics to have. But the infinite game, which I'm sure you've read, is, I think, ultimately what leaders are here for.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to come on to. I'm glad you said that. That's exactly what I was going to say. You talk about purpose, and it has to be in the mind of an infinite game as opposed to a finite game. And he talks about having a just cause. So I forget Simon's just cause, but mine is to be in a world where everyone's led by great leaders. And I think when you have your cause that is not self-serving but serving others, and a purpose that really is genuinely just trying to give and to help, then you're really onto the sort of right tracks of having a solid purpose. You say finite ideas or metrics, and that's all about business performance, really, right? So they're good and essential if you want to have a thriving business, but not what attracts people to your business, not what attracts people to you or to your cause or to your team. I mean, you must have read it then. There's some great analogies that Simon uses about a just cause that almost you could not believe. And it really helps focus your mind. Okay, why am I doing it? And it comes around the purpose that if you're leaving a company, for example, if you leave leaders, you leave managers, you don't leave the company. But the same in reverse, you join because of the culture, because of the leaders. And throughout my career, I've done that. I have joined and left places because of people, leaders, not just that, but for other reasons. But fundamentally, the reason why I'm making the decision to move to somewhere else is because of the leaders, is because of the culture, because of the style. And the finite metrics like salary and benefits are almost secondary to me. Always important because I need to pay mortgage, I need to pay bills and whatever, but are secondary. Truly honest, it's all about the leader, it's all about the culture, and it's truly what brings great people to organizations. So purpose is all a big part of that, having a very clear vision, clear purpose. So yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because that's exactly what I was coming on to.
Michael, I've had the privilege of working with some of the top global brands around the world over the last 25 to 30 years. And I've also had the privilege of facilitating many of their onboarding programs, company mission, vision, and values, company purpose. But one of the things I realized early on is that often what we do is we spend a lot of time getting people to understand company purpose and vision and values, when the individuals who we're asking to embrace those principles have never answered those questions for themselves. And so I think what we're now seeing is companies going, when I've helped Michael to be clear about his purpose and his vision and his non-negotiables and his core principles, he will then bring that into the organization in a way which is much richer and much more well-defined. And I think there's plenty of evidence now, certainly in my consulting work, that when you start there, that rather than trying to sheep dip somebody into a corporate philosophy or a set of values, that you start with them. Who are you? What are you about? What gets you up in the morning? What's important to you? What are your non-negotiables? And then you explain to them what the company's about, and you create that fit. I think there's a much more natural segue into ownership, into deliberate leadership, into being an organizational ambassador, a brand ambassador, if you like. But it starts with you, first of all, being clear about those things in your own mind. And so I think for many years, I would argue that companies have gone about that the wrong way, asking people to, recite the creed of the organization when the individuals have never really asked those deep questions for themselves.
I'm really glad you said that, because I have long suspected what you just said. I'm glad to hear there's backing to that. And I just could not agree with you more. I mean, that makes a huge amount of sense. And I've worked in organizations where they've got a very clear purpose, a very good, clear vision, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's never been asked of me before, So I'm thinking, well, yeah, it aligns, but actually I've got other passions, I've got other things. So I'm very fortunate in that in my journey, I've looked inwards and I've seen and I've found a purpose. I found what I'm really passionate about. And other people's passions might be completely different, and I might be ridiculed for having a passion in leadership, maybe. But that's my passion. Okay, that's what I'm really interested in. That's why I go to work more than anything else in the world, is because I want to help other people to become better leaders. And you're true in what you're saying, that most of the time I would argue that organizations don't ask the individuals what are their values, what is their purpose, what is it, what world do they want to live in. And that's okay if generally they meet. But what I've found is actually by doing podcasts, by talking about it more myself, by telling people this is my vision, you find that leaders start to say, okay, well, I'll open this door for you, come in, help, if that's your vision, if that's what you want to do, help us to realize that for you, So what I would say to people is that just because your organization isn't asking of you, it doesn't mean they don't care and don't want to listen. It's sometimes you might need to be a bit more vocal and talk to that. But you've got to make sure you speak to the right people in an organization. Do you think that's true?
I think that's absolutely true. And I think as organizational leaders become more aware of the value of what we're discussing, it makes sense. It's almost a no-brainer, Michael, that if I can help you to unlock your best, Michael, if I can help you to play to your strengths and your passion and your purpose, then it stands to reason that those principles are going to benefit me in an organizational sense. So why would I want to keep you constrained in a pigeonhole or in a box that doesn't necessarily give you, the full extent or the full expression? And I realize that it's naive to think that every job can be a completely perfect fit for everybody's individual passion and strengths. But at least if you're looking to create that job fit and that organizational fit, not just looking at technical competencies, but some of these things that you've referenced here, I think in the long term, we're going to see people who are much more fulfilled, and that has to be good for them, and it has to be good for the organization, I think, Mike.
Absolutely. We've only really covered one aspect of your book, and unfortunately, I'm saddened that we're starting to run out of time for the podcast. But it's definitely a book that I'm going to read, because, as I say, if I'd had at the start my journey, it probably would have fast-tracked me through a lot of that self-reflection. I've taken probably over nearly 2 years of that. And actually, it's probably a continual thing. Am I right in saying that? Self-reflection, you'll do it consistently. And as you sort of experience leadership for yourself, you've got to ask of yourself, did I handle that situation okay? Could I improve on that again in the future? So I would imagine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly that first section on self-leadership, you will refer back to time and time again at various stages of your career. Is that correct in saying that?
It's absolutely correct, Michael. And I think if you're serious about growing, not just as a leader, but as a human being, you will continually go back and look to sharpen and hone and refine and redefine in some cases. Mm-hmm. So one of the great joys for me, even in writing this book, was to go back to many of these principles and go through that journey myself and subject myself to those questions of purpose and identity and character, and then further on in, influence and communication and trust, and alignment, and all of those things, I think, which are important. So in summary, Michael, the book has 12 principles that I think might go some way to answering your question that you started with in LinkedIn. But certainly it is definitely only beginning the conversation. And I hope that we will be able to do that as well and continue this fascinating discussion around a subject which clearly is something that you and I are both really interested in. So thanks for having me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for your valuable time. And sorry, where can we get the book then? I think it's on Amazon.
So it's on Amazon. It is available in South Africa as well, but best to go to Amazon. Leadership the Exponential Effect, Andrew J. Brough, Brough, and you'll find it there. It's available as an ebook and in paperback, and Amazon will produce it in the country of order as well in paperback form if people want it.
I prefer paperback. I don't know why. But
that's really interesting. I wasn't sure about that, about whether we should go that route of making it both, an ebook and paperback. But I'm really glad that we did both, because you, like so many others, have said exactly that.
I think you're always trying to tell your kids to get off technology, and then I can't sit there on a Kindle or whatever trying to read a book, because if I get a book out, then kids, again, this is like lead with example. If you get a book out and you're reading a book, they just go and do it. My kids, they didn't get it from me, but they love reading, and they'll just go and grab a book and just read it. But the more they see their parents doing that, I think the more they'll do that. So the more I get a Kindle out, the more they're just going to get out a game or something like that. So I do believe I much prefer paperback, absolutely. Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure. And, I think we could talk for hours, and maybe in some time, maybe we can go through some of those other sections of your book, once I've finished reading it. And,
that would be an absolute privilege. Just let me know
series.
When you want to do that.
Great. So thank you very much for your time, and thanks for coming.
Thanks so much, Michael. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.